I'm going to talk about mobile Inception. It's an APT campaign that included both Windows, networking infrastructure, as Felix mentioned, routers were involved, and specifically the component I'm going to talk about is the mobile component of the APT campaign. And as Sher mentioned, I also work for Blue Coat along with Felix and Einar and maybe a few more of the speakers today. So one of the things I'd like to say at the outset is there's this kind of question, is the mobile threat overblown? And I just kind of want to address that at the front. There's been a lot of articles out recently saying that the mobile threat is overblown, and it kind of goes in cycles. And the cycle right now has been that the mobile threat is overblown. And yeah, so there's been a few articles that have been floating around that have said that kind of here and there over the years. And I think, maybe the reason for that is best discussed over beers later. But one of the things I think is there's a lot of reports that have come out in preceding years that have said that they've overhyped maybe the malware threat, the mobile malware threat, and they've said every report says it's increasing by 75 or 100%. There's been some that say up to 600% and in 3 months. And some that say 1,200% in 1 quarter, in 3 months. So you can see with this kind of overhype and the way that different AV vendors count malware threats, that the number may be overblown, but what I'm going to try to present in this presentation is that the impact, I don't think, is overblown. I think it's just that maybe the counting of the threats, and the millions of threats may be overblown. But the impact of one APT or maybe targeted attack is a better word, it still has a quite high impact. And so to talk a little bit about the high value of the targets, as Felix mentioned in the Internet of Things and the value of the targets, you have your personal device on you or within 10 feet pretty much 90 to 100% of the day. And that device is basically a sensor network. It can collect location information. It can collect personal data, your contacts, your calendars, your notes, your documents, your personal effects, as well as communication. It can record audio, your incoming outgoing calls, your incoming outgoing text messages, your email, or your corporate and personal email. So the richness of the data that's available for attack and sort of sitting on your mobile device is very high value to an attacker if they were able to collect that information. So I don't think the attacks on the mobile device are going to go down over time. I think that the richness of the data will lead to a persistent increase in the attacks on the mobile device. So the Inception campaign was named Inception because of the layers, and you'll see the way I describe it, that the researchers discovered one component and behind that more components opened up, and there were just so many layers to it that it seemed like a dream within a dream to the guys who originally discovered it. And the point that I came into the research was on the mobile side, which we'll go into in further detail in a few slides. But first, I wanted to give an overview of what the Inception campaign discovered. So originally, the targets for this is the Windows component primarily. The targets were seen mostly in Russia at the beginning, and then around the Russian perimeter on the west, and then kind of pushing out through Europe over to Belgium. And you can kind of see the general region where the attacks, and these were all targeted spear phishing attacks, more or less, that were kind of plotted on this chart. And the spear phishing targets that we were able to discover, or that the research team at Blue Coat was able to discover, were in the petroleum industry. They were governments, they were embassies, the UN members were targeted, military, finance. And so very high-level targets, a relatively small number of targets directly targeted with this campaign. Some of the emails you saw from Felix's campaign that came in the spear phishing emails showed like diplomatic cars for sale, Putin and sort of a Facebook of diplomats to see who's involved in what, emails, announcements from the UN, schedule changes, Over here, there's an engine specifically used in industrial facilities. And as Felix mentioned, there were some outliers. One was this Miss World, I think, was the email, and it was MRS World, and we weren't sure if there was a MRS Miss World or if that was a misspelling, but that was one outlier. And then the Victoria's Secret targeted email for a coupon to Victoria's Secret was another kind of outlier in the political and diplomatic oriented phishing emails. So the Windows component, quickly, it consisted of a phishing email, which had a RTF document, which you saw the contents on the previous slide. Once that was executed, it dropped a decoy Word document so that when the Microsoft, when Word crashed, another document would appear. It also dropped a VB script, which installed the malware, which is a polymorphic DLL, and an encrypted blob. When the polymorphic DLL was unpacked, it would decrypt the blob, and then that would give you a base DLL. So all this is to say, it was, from the time of opening the email, it installed several components, and in effect, you had a DLL that was installed that then installed other components, and everything above was heavily obfuscated. Everything below was the only thing that was written on disk. Everything below was in memory. Everything above was written on disk, but it was heavily obfuscated. So the Windows component was more sophisticated, as you'll see, in technical aspects than the mobile component. But in impact, it was roughly similar. So now we'll talk about the mobile Inception campaign. This is specifically for iPhone, Android, and BlackBerry. We'll talk specifically about the Android component. So the connection to the overall Inception campaign, this is kind of where the layers of layers comes in. The initial Windows victims connected to a CloudMe server in Sweden. The researchers were able to get access to the logs, and they were very cooperative to show the level of impact on the CloudMe server, which showed how many people were involved in the infections, and then also where the IP addresses were of the people connecting to the CloudMe servers on the back end to the admin interfaces. And those happened to come from these hacked routers. And as Felix mentioned, these were compromised routers, mostly in South Korea. And this is where the attackers were using, these routers to proxy the communications from some rented servers through to the CloudMe server to do command and control for the Windows components. So when they were looking at the routers, one of the things that they noticed is that they were using open SMTP relays to do spear phishing campaigns from the routers. So they intercepted one of the emails, and it showed it was a message written in Spanish that looked like a spear phishing campaign, which contained a link and said that it was a WhatsApp. To update your WhatsApp for iPhone, Android, or BlackBerry, click here. And so it turns out that that's a bit.ly link, and we were able to do some intelligence on look at the bit.ly information, and so from that you can discover the original URL leading to a few IP addresses, but specifically looking at the user, the bit.ly user or account that was used to create the link, we could see that about 10,000 other links were created at the same time, all within about the same day. So when they set up the campaign, kind of all happened at once. And they were only active since July 2014, so that'll kind of follow. All of this was discovered in between September and October of 2014, and you'll see that all the components of this kind of came together. Even though it was a large number of components, all the components kind of came together right before the campaign really went into effect. So it wasn't infrastructure that was lying around. This was kind of all special built for this purpose. So taking a look at the format of the URL, there's two primary components to it. One is the target ID, so an identification number that shows who the intended target was, along with an action code. And this action code, there's 3 different options that we saw. One is if it came with the number 743, then that would download something that looked like a WhatsApp update. With another 1040, with the value of 1024, it would look like something that looked like Viber, so a different mobile app. And then there were other numbers that we didn't see specifics of, but they looked like they were MMS and SMS phishing campaigns, but we didn't see the contents of those, so we won't talk about those today. From Bitly, again, we were able to see that there were clicks in over 37 countries. So this would be specifically for the mobile part of the campaign. You can see that the region is roughly similar to the overall Windows Inception campaign, where it mostly focuses on Europe and Russia. But in this case, there are some outliers. There's some out in Chile. The email that we intercepted was going to I think Paraguay, a UN delegate in Paraguay. So there's some outliers in South America and Africa, as well as sort of around Europe and Russia. So as I mentioned, the targeted attacks were for Android, iPhone, and BlackBerry. They claimed that there was also a target for Windows Phone, but we were unable to download it, so we don't believe that they went to the effort of building a Windows malware, at least yet. But we were able to find for Android, iPhone, and BlackBerry. So when you install and open the app looks like a WhatsApp update, or it looks like a very bad version of WhatsApp. It's very simple. It just has the text update that you can click at the top. It runs everything in the background. It doesn't really do anything. It's not very interactive. It's not very clever, but it does install the services as soon as you open it up. So it does what it needs to do. It requires Ice Cream Sandwich or later, which is a more modern version of Android. Most malware that are more generally propagating, not targeted, usually run back to Gingerbread, very old versions of Androids. This is kind of unique in this case. And again, this shows that it was created, it looks like it was created about October of 2014, which is right before we started to see the campaign. So again, it wasn't sort of sitting around on the shelf. It looks like it was custom built for this purpose, for this campaign. And it looks like it was built looking through the code with a mix of boilerplate code that may have existed from other campaigns, as well as with custom code. I'll kind of show a little bit of that. So when you look at malware, Windows malware tends to be more obfuscated. Android malware can still be fairly obfuscated. Some malware is, some malware isn't. This one happens to be a mix of both. So in this case, they went through the effort of removing all the class names. So on the left, you see the class names, and they've all been replaced with just sequential alphabetic characters. Method names have been removed. All variable names have been replaced. So this one's fairly not obfuscated, but at least mangled a bit so that it's a little bit harder. But in another section of the same sample, you can see from here they have very well-structured enterprise-looking code with data access objects defined and all very well documented. And including on the next slide, you can see here they've removed the method names, but they still have log text unencrypted, where you can see at the bottom, you can see phone number equals and stop recording. So it already kind of gives an indication of what their intent is with this malware, that maybe they might have something to do with recording phone information. So to wrap up the initial code overview, one of the other things that we saw was these Hindi characters in about 5 of the log messages, 5 out of hundreds of, maybe of 100 log messages. had these Hindi characters, and that was the only one indication of sort of non-English, non-ASCII text. And we believe this is one of many of the false flags that this Inception campaign put in all the various pieces of the malware. In some cases, in the Windows malware, if you happen to be looking at the malware under Ollie debug, for example, it would drop a well-known Chinese APT malware component to kind of make it look like it was a Chinese, a very simple Chinese APT attack. So there were many of these kind of false flags throughout the campaign, and this is just one of them. So either they outsourced this development to India maybe, or they stuck it in there to throw people off the trail of attribution. But we couldn't really make too much sense of that. Taking a quick look at the permissions, there were 5 permissions in here that were used. They look quite valuable. Read SMS, read contacts, read the calendar, read the bookmarks, but they didn't seem to be used anywhere in the code, so we just kind of ignore them. They also ask for access to the accounts. They access internet, which is typical of most applications. All these permissions are kind of typical of most applications, so none of them really stand out. As anybody's looked at mobile malware, it's very hard to look at just the permissions and see anything that stands out as compared to average applications. But just to kind of give an overview of what they do have access to, they also have location information, and then this is the more important one. This is kind of a bit of an outlier. They ask for permission to record audio, to get incoming and outgoing phone call information, and to get your call log. And apparently this is so important they included it twice. They wanted to read and write external storage, so they wanted to be doubly sure. I double-checked my slides last night, and it turns out they do ask for it twice, and there's no other reason except for even malware authors make mistakes. Looking at the different components to kind of figure out what it's trying to do. So the first component takes a look at the network. It detects whether you're on a Wi-Fi network or a cellular network. This is often important because they're going to be pushing around large files, and they might not want to push large files while you're on a cellular network, or you'll notice your data rates going up. Your on-task update receiver, this sends periodic updates to the command and control server and sends information, which I'll describe later. I'll tell you what it is, but basically your personal information and various information about your location and your telemetry is sent on a regular basis about every 30 seconds. And then this one is sort of getting to the meat of it. This updates your call state, whether you have a call incoming or outgoing, whether you have the phone off the hook or if you've hung up. This one also records the caller's phone number, so if somebody's called you, it tucks away the phone number so that it can use that later to put in the recorded call information. And then it triggers the recording service to actually record all the incoming and outgoing calls. So this component is specifically just to record the outgoing phone number. So when you're calling somebody else, it'll tuck away the phone number so that when the call is being recorded, that number goes in the file name of the recording so they know who you were talking to. And then the record service, this is the meat of this is the entire purpose of this malware. And this basically takes all your audio from your incoming and outgoing calls and saves them to an MP4 under a certain data directory on the mobile device. And then periodically another service coming up will take those and send those out to the command and control servers. So this is one of the components that triggers, it detects the files coming in, the recorded audio files in the directory, and then prepares them to be sent out. And the next component packages, so it'll tar up all the recorded phone calls, recorded MP4s. It encrypts them, so all communication to the command and control server is end-to-end encrypted, and that's probably because you'll see that they use a lot of intermediate proxy servers. So they don't want those proxy servers because they're kind of hijacked or compromised, like the routers in South Korea, for example. They don't want you to be able to intercept the communication at those proxies. And then finally, they have a way to update themselves. So I mentioned that they have 5 permissions that they don't use out of the box with the initial malware, but since they have the permission and they have the ability to update themselves, they can download another compiled bytecode file and basically update dynamically. And so with this capability, they could add additional features that utilize the permissions that they did not in the initial malware. So kind of in summary of what was collected, the audio is recorded to files and then sent up to the command and control servers. And then I promised that I'd mention what information was collected periodically. So periodically, every 30 seconds or so, just information about your location. But they don't just get your geolocation with your GPS information. They also pull in Wi-Fi SSIDs. So those you can buy the SSIDs that are in range. You can also figure out better location information, as well as cellular network. So which cell towers you're closest to also gives them a third way of determining your location. So they collect all of that. Obviously they collect the type of phone, your phone number, and the basic information, as well as the SIM. And sort of basic information that's collected about every 30 seconds. So the whole process looks something like this so far. You get a phishing email, the victim opens it, installs it on their phone, downloads it from the malware server, installs it on their phone. One of the other interesting things about this malware is that the first thing it does is, instead of having a configuration file specific to the victim on the device to tell it where the command and control servers are and how to access the network, it goes out to LiveJournal. It doesn't contain any configuration information on the device. It goes out to a public website, public blog, LiveJournal. One of the first things that you notice, again, this was created September of 2017, or 2014, and so it was created right before the campaign got going. The other thing you notice is it claims in all of the accounts that the account holder is from Iran. And again, I think that's just a false flag. We saw Hindi, now it's Iran. I think they're just kind of putting things out there so that if there is, by chance, any attribution information in the mix that is accurate, they have enough false information out there that you're kind of thrown off what's accurate and what's not. So if you look at the content of the blog, there's only one blog post on each of the blogs, and it usually contains a little bit of realistic-looking text, a realistic-looking headline, but if you notice in the body, there's a big blob of base64, and it turns out if you take that base64 and decode it, it becomes a binary encrypted blob. The malware decrypts that blob, and if you unpack it, you get 3 things. You get another base64 encoded blob and something called a proxy key. These things are sent directly to the command and control server and are never used by the malware. So I believe that there's some sort of authentication system so that no third party can hijack the command and control servers. But again, that's not verified. It's just all we know is that these are sent directly to the command and control servers and never used by the malware itself. The third thing is the actual proxy URL, and this gives us some idea of what the next hop of the command and control servers is. And so we found 5 of these configuration files. 5 of them were on LiveJournal, and then there was one on Tumblr, and Tumblr had taken it down. So we didn't have that content. But we were able to find 5, and the websites, as you can see, all look just a little bit different. If you can find any similarities, try to spot anything you see in common. But in their content, they're all very, very different. And in terms of where they're hosted we found them in Poland. There was 2 in Germany, 1 in Russia, and 1 in Latvia. So they were all spread out. And this is kind of typical of this Inception campaign, is that they didn't reuse one infrastructure in any one country. They kind of spread out all across Europe and Eastern Europe and Western Europe as well. So the one commonality between all these servers, it turns out, is that they were all running a particularly old version of Joomla. So they were probably compromised. That's the assumption, that they were legitimate web servers otherwise, and they were just compromised and used as proxy servers by the people behind the Inception campaign. So the whole picture looks something like this now. The phishing email comes in. There's people involved in maybe 38 different countries that potentially clicked on the link. We know one of the emails was going to a UN official in Paraguay, and like the rest of the Inception campaign, we have an assumption that the rest were going to high-level government officials, similar to the rest of the phishing emails. The download servers for the original malware, there were 2 different IP addresses used. One of them was in Iceland, the other one was in the Netherlands. The malware application had text that somewhat indicated that it might be Hindi, and so there was like an India connection. LiveJournal is hosted in Russia, and the accounts claimed that they were created in Iran. And then the hacked servers, where the information was, the personal information and the phone calls were being sent, were hacked servers in 4 different countries, including Germany, Latvia, Russia, and Poland. These servers then could send updates back to the malware, but more than likely there was some command and control behind here, another layer, maybe several layers of proxies, as we saw with other parts of the Inception campaign. So overall, it was a very intricate, significant effort was put into building this architecture, and also in its placement, putting the infrastructure all over the world, not sort of reusing one country or mostly 2 or 3 countries in Eastern Europe. It kind of differentiates itself from other campaigns that are more locally, it's easier to kind of pick, who might be behind, to determine some sort of attribution or some sort of rough attribution based on the infrastructure. So a few things in conclusion that I wanted to point out. So we talked about whether the malware threat is overblown. It's kind of an ongoing question. And so I kind of want to address that and say, this was obviously very targeted mobile espionage, so it was something different than the typical widespread SMS fraud or click fraud or anything like that. That's sort of the widespread malware you hear so much about. So this is not heard as much as those other types of malware. The command and control infrastructure on this was fairly sophisticated. So it shows that there was a fair amount of effort put behind it. More than likely was some sort of government-backed or well-funded organization, well organized at least. The attribution was heavily masked, and this goes to say again, perhaps it could be government or, anyways, we'll just say that the attribution was very heavily masked. We can't say who was behind it, but they went through a lot of effort to put up a lot of stages, and the amount of time and money that must have gone into that was quite significant, and setting up all the different components, including Windows, Android, iPhone, BlackBerry, and maybe they had potential to do Windows Phone as well if the campaign had gone on longer. And so finally, the mobile components, you could see, were not maybe as sophisticated technically as the Windows component. They didn't have as much obfuscation. They weren't as complicated. But this is, mobile is still new to malware authors, and Windows is old hat, so they have better tricks, they have better frameworks, and I feel like mobile will trend the same way that Windows malware has trended over the years in sophistication. But regardless of the amount of technical sophistication and the development prowess of the malware authors, the impact was quite significant. They have your audio, they have all the incoming and outgoing calls, they potentially have your incoming and outgoing SMS messages if they were to add that capability, because they would have the permission. They have all your location information, so they know, where you've been, what you're doing, who you're talking to. So quite rich data to have, and quite high impact. And if it only takes a certain threshold to get that information, then that's kind of the threshold that the attackers are going to rise to. Once they need to rise above, they will rise above, but if they can build something like this that's maybe not as sophisticated as the Windows components, because there's, I don't know, maybe not as much sophisticated Android defense or mobile defense, then they'll do kind of the minimally, put in the minimal effort, but still achieve a high impact. Collecting all your incoming and outgoing calls is still quite significant. So, any questions? And I should point out there were many people to thank. Snorra, also on the Blue Coat Norway team. Professor Plum, Waylon Grange from Blue Coat, as well as Felix in the audience. There were a lot of people involved, and I should thank them all. So, and you can read the full report here. Yes, and.